Good morning, round two. So usually right now Isaac would come up and read this passage, but I wanted to give you guys my quick introduction first and then allow Isaac to come up and read this passage. And so that's why I'm walking around moving stuff around while I'm talking to you right now. So really quick, first few things, we got 5 things I wanted to bring up and make just evident before we get into the reading of this passage. One, as we read in this section of Scripture, there's terms used that are not going to necessarily translate over. Like when we talk about Cush, it means modern-day Ethiopia. So that way you have an understanding what that is. 2, the oracle or the prophecy in chapter 18, because we're going to cover 3 chapters today, is about the Ethiopians. The prophecy in 19 is about Egypt and no one else. And just because these things are written to a specific group of people does not mean we cannot learn from them, and it does not mean that some things are applicable today to our lives. But I wanted to make that evidently clear that these things are not about the United States. These things are not about the UK. These things are not about any other foreign country other than who they were clearly and directly written to. As I studied this week and looking into this, you would be surprised at how many people have tried to say that these chapters represent other nations other than who they were directly written to. But when we have prophecy that is directly written to and quoted to who it's to, we know that that's specifically who it's for. It still means we can learn from it, but it means that we should understand that that's not directed at our nation. And I just want to be clear with that. It was alarming how many things I saw try to make this fit what it wasn't. And the last thing I wanted to talk to you guys about, yes, we will be talking about a naked guy today. So I wanted to leave you with that as we step in, and Isaac's going to come up and read to you about this naked guy. Have fun.
Thanks, guys. Really setting me up for success here. Isaiah 18 through 20. Land of whirring wings that is beyond the rivers of Cush, which sends ambassadors by the sea in vessels of papyrus on the waters. Go, you swift messengers, to a nation tall and smooth, to a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers divide. All you inhabitants of the world, you who dwell on the earth, when a signal is raised on the mountains, look. When a trumpet is blown, hear. For thus the Lord said to me, I will quietly look from my dwelling, like clear heat in sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. For before the harvest, when the blossom is over, and the flower becomes a ripening grape, he cuts off the shoots with pruning hooks, and the spreading branches he lops off and clears away. They shall all of them be left to the birds of prey of the mountains and to the beasts of the earth, and the birds of prey will summer on them, and all the beasts of the earth will winter on them. At that time, tribute will be brought to the Lord of hosts, from a people tall and smooth, from a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers divide, to Mount Zion, the place of the name of the Lord of hosts. An oracle concerning Egypt. Behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and comes to Egypt, and the idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence, and the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. And I will stir up Egyptians against Egyptians, and they will fight, each against another, and each against his neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. And the spirit of the Egyptians within them will be emptied out, and I will confound their counsel, and they will inquire of the idols and the sorcerers and the mediums and the necromancers. And I'll give over the Egyptians into the hand of a hard master, and a fierce king will rule over them, declares the Lord God of hosts. and the waters of the sea will be dried up, and the river will be dry and parched, and its canals will become foul, and the branches of Egypt's Nile will diminish and dry up. Reeds and rushes will rot away. There will be bare places by the Nile, on the brink of the Nile, and all that is sown by the Nile will be parched, will be driven away, and will be no more. The fishermen will mourn and lament, all who cast a hook in the Nile, and they will languish who spread nets on the water. The workers in combed flats will be in despair, and the weavers of white cotton. Those who are the pillars of the land will be crushed, and all who work for pay will be grieved. The princes of Zon are utterly foolish. The wisest counselors of Pharaoh give stupid counsel. How can you say to Pharaoh, I am a son of the wise, a son of ancient kings? Where then are your wise men? Let them tell you, that they might know what the Lord of hosts has purposed against Egypt. The princes of Zon have become fools, and the princes of Memphis are deluded. Those who are the cornerstones of her tribes have made Egypt stagger. The Lord has mingled within her a spirit of confusion, and they will make Egypt stagger in all its deeds, as a drunken man staggers in his vomit. And there will be nothing for Egypt that head or tail, palm branch or reed may do. In that day, the Egyptians will be like women and tremble with fear before the hand that the Lord of hosts shakes over them. And the land of Judah will become a terror to the Egyptians. Everyone to whom it is mentioned will fear because of the purpose that the Lord of hosts has purposed against them. In that day, there will be 5 cities in the land of Egypt that speak the language of Canaan and swear allegiance to the Lord of hosts. One of these will be called the city of destruction. In that day, there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord at its border. It will be a sign and a witness to the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. When they cry to the Lord because of oppressors, he will send them a savior and defender and deliver them. And the Lord will make himself known to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians will know the Lord in that day and worship with sacrifice and offering. And they will make vows to the Lord and perform them. And the Lord will strike Egypt, striking and healing. And they will return to the Lord, and he will listen to their pleas for mercy and heal them. In that day, there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and Assyria will come into Egypt, and Egypt into Assyria, and the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. In that day, Israel will be the third with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth, whom the Lord of hosts has blessed, saying, Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. In the year that the commander-in-chief, who was sent by Sargon, the king of Assyria, came to Ashdod and fought against it and captured it, at that time the Lord spoke by Isaiah, the son of Amoz, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from your waist and take off your sandals from your feet. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. Then the Lord said, As my servant Isaiah has walked naked and barefoot for 3 years as a sign and a portent against Egypt and Cush, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptian captives and the Cushite exiles, both the young and the old, naked and barefoot, with buttocks uncovered, the nakedness of Egypt. Then they shall be dismayed and ashamed because of Cush their hope, and of Egypt their boast. And the inhabitants of this coastland will say in that day, Behold, this is what has happened to those in whom we hoped and to whom we fled for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria. And we, how shall we escape?
Thanks, Isaac. That was a lot, but there's some cool stuff in there that I'm really looking forward to getting into with you guys. I was supposed to do chapter 18 today, and that was it. But as I started to study 18, it brought me into 19 and then into 20, and it was all really one thing. And so I didn't feel right starting 18 and then making you guys wait 3 weeks for the conclusion of what happens. And so I took on the challenge, so to speak, of doing all 3 chapters. And as I got into it this week, it was a struggle to find time. But as I found time, I found that this was a really cool passage, and I learned a lot. And I learned so much more than what I'll get to share with you guys today, because if I shared everything, we would be here for more than a day. But let's start, right? Isaiah 18, chapter 1 and 2, it says, land of whirring wings that is beyond the rivers of Cush, which send ambassadors by the sea in vessels of papyrus on the waters. Go, you swift messengers, to a nation tall and smooth, to a people feared, near and far, a nation mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers divide. This is one of those passages that makes me laugh, because I very clearly understand what's happening here, and you get a clear picture, right? I mean, it's not confusing, and yet somehow, even though this says to the beyond the rivers of Cush, people will ultimately try to say that this is an unfulfilled prophecy, or an unfulfilled thing that hasn't happened yet. And like I said before, we know that it did. And the reason why we know that it did is because the Nubian king, or the Ethiopian king, Panki is the best way I can say it, in 741 BC, he was this really crazy Ethiopian guy who came from a small country and decided to say, I want to get involved in world politics. And from a small country in Cush, or Ethiopia, he actually went in and invaded Egypt, one of the 2 military mights. Like, there's 2 great militaries in the time frame, right? Egypt has had one of the greatest militaries of the ancient world for a long time. And the Assyrian nation had risen up, and there's these 2 opposing forces. And this tiny little country of Ethiopia invaded and took over Egypt. And he established himself as the Pharaoh of Egypt. And so he brought in the 25th dynasty, or the 25th set of rulers within Egypt. And as he did so, it was an Ethiopian rule. So there's a section of history that I didn't know about where Ethiopia ran and controlled all of Egypt. I don't know how many of you guys knew that, but that was surprising to me, especially if you look at where Ethiopia is today as a country, right? And considering the fact that Egypt was this military powerhouse. And so as they get involved, they decide to send messengers. That's what these ambassadors are, right? So Cush, or Ethiopia, is sending these messengers out. Sorry, I got lost in my notes. So this guy, he takes over about 740 BC, roughly, and he basically decides, I want to get involved, and I think I said this, in world politics. So he sends out these ambassadors to Judah, and Judah basically says, no. And it's this odd thing to think about, because you have all of this military might of Egypt and Assyria, and they're at war, and I'm getting so messed up in my own notes. But I'm just going to tell you guys this. Out of these 2 military conflicts that were happening, God just clearly says, don't get involved. The reason why God says not to get involved is because oftentimes the world today, we look at collective strength as what matters, right? Even today, it's a common thought. Like, you don't want to get into any kind of argument or debate or anything like that unless you have numbers on your side. It's a human nature thing. Look at the fact that nations sign alliances with other nations over and over again, whether they're going to firmly hold or not. And so what's happening is this Ethiopian king is going around to all these nations, and he's saying, hey, sign a treaty with us, and if anything happens, we'll send Egypt to back you up. We've got the military might of Egypt to back you up. And so it's this tempting offer to sign up on one of these 2 opposing forces, right? It kind of comes down to you have to pick a side. And I love this, that Isaiah basically steps up in the middle and says, no, we're not going to take sides. But instead, I've got a task for you. As he's standing before these ambassadors, he takes the message and he turns it around and he says, I have a message for you to take to all of the same nations that you've already taken this message to. And I love this. There's a quote I wanted to share with you guys. It says this: God rules all the nations, And it would be better for ambassadors of collective security to take a different message to the far parts of the earth, to wait for the Lord, for he is planning his sudden invitation. The harvest expected from human plans will come to nothing, but a world remnant will gather in the land of Zion. The reason why I wanted to share that with you guys is because we get this picture that Isaiah literally takes these ambassadors and turns the message around and says, instead of you coming to me, I want you to take this message. And the message he gives them is this: all you inhabitants of the world, you who dwell on the earth, this is Isaiah 18:3-4. All you who dwell on the earth, when a signal is raised on the mountains, look. When a trumpet is blown, hear. For thus the Lord said to me, I will quietly look for my dwelling place, like clear heat and sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. God's not concerned about the conflicts that are happening, and he's clearly made a decision to sit out of this combat, or this conflict. And he tells everyone else to do the same. He's sending this message and saying, God's got this under control. God's timing and God's planning for this are not for us to be signing alliances or making treaties or getting ready to plan war against Assyria. He said, that's not our plan or our purpose. God's got this fight. He says, decline this alliance. And so he does. And he sends the same message basically back to all. So these ambassadors have come through all these countries and gotten to Judah. And he says, go back to all the countries you've come from and tell them not to sign that alliance, not to sign up for war. And so he sends them on their way. And I just love the idea of that. Like, he basically says, God is the God of all nations. So even though you might not be part of us, Israel, God still has a plan and a purpose for you. And it reminded me of that. And over and over again, you guys, in the Bible, it tells us that God is the God of all nations. Look at 1 Chronicles 16:31. Let the heavens be glad and let the earth rejoice. And let them say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Or Psalms 22:28, for kingship belongs to the Lord, and he rules over the nations. All nations are already under God's authority. They're already under his stewardship, and he has the ultimate authority over what happens in them. The difference lies in our obedience to follow, whether it's his ways or to rebel against them. And a lot of times, we oftentimes choose to take matters into our own hands. I don't know how many times in my life I've chosen to take matters into my own hands. I don't know how many times in my life I've chosen to disregard wise counsel or godly counsel, to do things my own way in the attempt to come out victorious or come out better. And that's a hard lesson I've had to learn. We see here that when the timing is right, that God will raise his banner for all to see, and it will be clear, and it will be a clear sign that he is acting. And until then, he's going to be withdrawn from worldly politics and scheming against Assyria. And then when he takes action, like we see in verse 5 and 6 that I'm about to read, we'll see that when the time is right, it'll be devastating and decisive. Verses 5 and 6, for before the harvest, when the blossom is over, and the flower becomes a ripening grape, he cuts off the shoots with pruning hooks, and spreading branches he lops off and clears away. They shall all of them be left to the birds of prey, for the mountains to the beasts of the earth. And the birds of prey will summer on them, and the beasts of winter will winter on them. When God chooses to act against Assyria, he's saying that the corpses will last for so long that the birds will be able to summer on them. They'll be able to eat on these corpses all summer and not go hungry. And that the bodies will continue to last through winter, that the beasts of the earth will come and feast on these dead people. And that's morbid, right? It's this dark thing to think about. But it's the idea of God saying, there's nothing for you to worry about. This is a prophecy showing the downfall of Assyria. This is a prophecy, this is a word coming to you so that you can relax and understand that God will take care of it in God's timing. I can't imagine this would be an easy thing for a foreign nation like Egypt or Ethiopia to hear. They're not countries that necessarily sit and listen to what God has to say, but instead they have many idols and many gods. And oftentimes, if one isn't answering the call or question or desire you have the way you want, you just go to the next one. And you go to the next one. And you go to the next one until finally someone answers your request in the way you want. And then all of a sudden, that's the one you're going to worship and praise because it happened. To me, it sounds like rolling the dice over and over and over again in expectation to get what you want. And when you get what you want, all of a sudden to just decide to jump up and down and praise that number as like, ooh, I finally got it right, so this must be the real God. But it's a silly thing to think about that that's the way our human mind and nature wants to go because we want it our way and our timing. It's so hard, I think, you guys, for us to learn how to set aside our own wants and desires, our own passion for this is our time, this is the way I want it, and be able to say, okay, God, how do you want it? When do you want it? And how, like, it's such a foreign concept. I think I said, I'm being redundant, but I want to make sure this point comes clear. There has to be a point in our life where we make the decision to say, okay, enough of myself, enough of what I want, but God, what do you want? I don't know if you guys have ever come to a place like that in your life, but there's been times where I've had to let go of things that I really didn't want to let go of. This isn't in my notes, but I want to share this story with you guys. When we moved to North Carolina, I went with an expectation. My best friend had reached out and said, hey, I really want you to come, and I really want you to be the youth pastor at this church. And so we went with expectation to be the youth pastor and to be on staff at this church. And the day we got there, I ran into my buddy, and I went and gave him a big hug. And I said, hey, how's it going? He's like, hey, I really want you to meet someone. I'm like, okay. And he's like, hey, this is my buddy, Ben. He's the new youth pastor. And my heart dropped. My stomach dropped. And I was like, what did we move here for? But the thing is we clearly knew, and we had very, very strongly felt God call us to North Carolina. And so we went. And so for the first 2 years that we were in North Carolina, I had stepped out of youth ministry, and I didn't serve in youth ministry. I gave that up. And that was so hard because my heart for so long had been youth ministry. And I had to give that up, and I got involved in our men's ministry, and I got involved in different areas of ministry, and I loved it, and I learned so much. And after 2 years, our youth pastor left under some very bad circumstances. And it gutted our youth group. Our kids were broken and sad. Their youth pastor had left without saying anything and had basically just chosen things of this world over his family and over the church. And I remember being like, wow, that sucks. And I remember thinking, well, we better find someone. And then my heart started to hurt. And I started to ask, like, why? And I remember my wife looking at me one day and just going, Alex, this is why we're here. This is why we moved. And I said, no, that I gave that up. I moved on from that. And as I moved on from that, I got involved in men's mission. This is where I want to be. And I remember that next day being in our men's Bible study. And at the end of Bible study, Mason, our men's ministry leader, stopped me and said, hey, can I talk to you for a minute? I said, yeah, man, what's going on? And he said, why aren't you stepping in? I said, what do you mean? He said, why aren't you stepping into youth ministry? You know it's the burden on your heart. And I remember saying, well, maybe you're right. So I went and talked to our pastor, and I said, hey, I don't know if this is where I'm supposed to be. I gave up on this dream. I gave up on this desire. And he said, maybe it wasn't something that was right at the time you moved, but maybe it's right now. And I remember we prayed about it, and I stepped into doing youth ministry, and I was the youth pastor there for 3 years, and I got to be part of the lives of so many great kids. And it was one of the most amazing things in my life because if I had not sat for 2 years and learned as much as I could doing men's ministry, I would have never been able to lead that youth group the way I needed to. And this whole story, what I'm trying to get to you guys, what I'm trying to let you understand is sometimes things are not in our timing. And we have to be willing to say, okay, We have to be willing to take the things that are our hopes and our dreams, our desires. We have to be willing to set them down and let God take them. Because only then can God work on our hearts and get us in the right place. Because ultimately it's his desire to bring us the fruition of those dreams. Why do you think we have those dreams? Why do you think we have those desires? It's because those are the things hardwired into us. Those are the things that God has instilled in us to be. But the thing is, oftentimes we try to grab onto our hopes and our dreams in our timing and in our way. And we have to be willing to let them go. This prophecy, you guys, at the end of 18, it talks about how this turning point is, and it says basically one day will come, and instead of Ethiopia sending messengers for alliances, they will send people to come worship and bring gifts to God. What's really cool to me, you guys, is this verse in Ecclesiastes 3:11. It took me a long time to wrestle with this and learn this. But it says this: he has made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. And in layman's terms, basically it says this: all things are made beautiful in God's timing, not ours. Not so that we would have any understanding of why, but so we would have to rely on him for our understanding. And it must have been an interesting prophecy for this messengers to take back to Ethiopia, saying, hey, one day you will return to Israel, but to worship God. What's crazy to me, you guys, is in Acts 8:26 through 40, we see a fulfillment of this prophecy. There's an Ethiopian guy riding a chariot, and Philip gets caught up, and next thing he knows, he's running alongside this chariot, and he's like, hey, do you understand what you're reading there? And this guy's like, how am I supposed to understand it if I don't have someone to teach me what it says? And so Philip jumps in the chariot with this Ethiopian guy. He looks down, and the scroll in his hand is Isaiah. And it's the 53rd chapter. Not quite this chapter, but do you know how amazing that is? And so he jumps in and he says, what is this? And Philip starts to take him through what Isaiah 53 says. And if you don't know, that's the suffering servant. That's the sacrifice that Jesus is destined to fulfill. It's the perfect telling of what happens in the crucifixion hundreds of years before it happens. To a T. And so he leads him through Isaiah 53 and explains to him how this is Jesus. And that guy gets saved, and then he goes back to Ethiopia. And did you guys know that Ethiopia had a massive revival? And I don't know if it was related to this guy or not, but the early church for Ethiopia thrived. And it's still alive and strong today. But we start to see fulfillment of these little things in prophecy, and oftentimes you have to think that this is no way in any way of their desired time frame. Right? Instead, it's hundreds of years later, and yet they had to be willing to sit on it. As we get into chapter 19, we're going to continue to see these things happening. And so in Isaiah 19, it's broken up into three sections, really. And I just want to go over this with you. We see the judgments against Egypt, and I'm going to need your guys' help with this part. The second part, we're going to see the healing of Egypt. And the third part, we're going to see Egypt and Ethiopia become the epitome or the perfect example of what it means to not follow God. So in chapter 19, verse 1, it says, behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and comes to Egypt, and the idols of Egypt will tremble in his presence, and the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. I'm a visual person, like 100%. I think I put this in the wrong order, Isaac, but there's a picture I have for you guys. I wanted you guys to see this picture really quick of some clouds. It's kind of probably hard to see, but if you saw that in the distance, would you be like, this is a great time? Or would you be a little intimidated? For those of you who don't know, that's right before a tornado comes. what the clouds start to look like. I have had the privilege of living through two crazy hurricanes in North Carolina and a tornado. Those experiences taught me a lot. I want to share one of them with you guys today. So I was at work, and I was working at the bank, and I looked out the window of our drive-thru, and it's beautiful blue skies. And next thing I know, all of our phones start going off, and we get a tornado warning. And I was like, okay. I've gotten tornado warnings before in North Carolina, and they never happened, or if they did, they happened really far away. And within a minute of getting that tornado warning, the sky outside had turned pitch black. And I swear it looked like the middle of the night. And next thing I know, we were moving very quickly into the vault. And we didn't close the door solid because you don't want to get locked in, but we closed the door almost all the way to where it's cracked open. And a tornado had touched down less than 5 miles away from the branch and moved the opposite direction, I was super thankful for that. But it tore through a section of Burgon, North Carolina that I knew people who lived there. And luckily, they were all safe. And I think only, and it sounds bad to say that, but I think only one person lost their life in that. But it could have been a lot worse. But it was an extremely eye-opening moment for me because in the span of 1 minute, the sky went from bright blue and clear to black. These clouds moved in rapidly, right? And that's what this verse is saying, though. It says, behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud that comes to Egypt, and the idols of Egypt will tremble in his presence, and the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. And I will promise you, my heart melted within me at the sight of that. That was an experience. And so I want you to understand this, that as God is showing up, as this prophecy is being said, God is going to show up like the rapid movement of clouds, like the rapid darkening of the sky, like this picture. It's not a fun time. But this is what he says in verses 2 through 13. It's going to be the judgment or the judgments that he casts on Egypt. And so this is where I want your guys' participation today. We're going to read this, and I want you guys to find the 5. And at the end of the 13 verses, I'm going to quiz you guys and see what you find, okay? So I do need, A, some participation from you guys, and 2, you guys are going to have to pay attention. And the words will be up on the screen for you. So verse 2, and I will stir up Egyptians against Egyptians, and they will fight each other against each other, one against each other, his neighbor, city against city, kingdom against kingdom, and the spirit of the Egyptians within them will be emptied out. And I will confound their counsel, and they will inquire of the idols and the sorcerers and the mediums and the necromancers. And I will give over the Egyptians into the hand of a hard master, and a fierce king will rule over them, declares the Lord God of hosts. And the waters of the sea will be dried up, and the river will be dry and parched, and its canals will become foul, and the branches of Egypt's Niles will diminish and dry up. Reeds and rushes will rot away. There will be bare places in the Nile, on the brink of the Nile, and all that is sown by the Nile will be parched and will be driven away and will be no more. The fishermen will mourn and lament, all who cast a hook in the Nile, and they will languish who spread nets on the water. The workers in combed flax will be in despair, and the weavers of white cotton, those who are the pillars of land, will be crushed, and all who work for pay will be grieved. The princes of Zon are utterly foolish. The wisest counsel of Pharaoh is given stupid counsel. How can you say to Pharaoh, I am the son of the wise, a son of ancient kings? Where then are your wise men? Let them tell you that they might know what the Lord of hosts has proposed against Egypt. The princes of Zon have become fools, and the princes of Memphis are deluded. Those who are cornerstones of tribes have made Egypt stagger. All right, so participation. 5 judgments. What do you guys see in there? Anybody got one? Yes. Yeah, so what is that called? Civil war. Okay, so they'll have civil wars. What else do you guys see in there? Yeah. Yeah, so That's still part of the Civil War, but yeah, they'll be fighting within their own tribes. Yeah? Yes. A drought? Yeah, that's part of it. What else do you guys see in there? Huh? Famine? Famine. What else do you guys see in there? Unemployment. They were having a hard time, right? They were grieving. What else do you guys see in there? Yes, Isaac. Yeah? They will have a fierce and harsh ruler. Yep. What else? Anybody else got anything else? They have no access to wisdom. Foolish counsel. That's a good one. All right. Anybody else? All right. You ready for this? I've got a list, and they're going to go up on the screen for you guys. The 5 things are: 1, they will suffer civil war. They will have confounded counsel. They will receive a hard and fierce ruler. They will have economic turmoil. So yes, the fishing, the famine, the drought, all of that. Economic turmoil. And the 5th one is they will suffer political downfall in the known world. So let's start breaking these down, right? All the fun stuff. So civil war, right? This is something not only immediately affecting Egypt, but it has lasting consequences. It's a terrible situation indeed when brother is arrayed in battle against brother, friend against friend, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom, until they perish together. That is the way it would come to pass in Egypt. All the things exist together in him, and outside of him there is no true unity. Harry Bultima. He's a really cool guy. He's the guy I used last time when I shared you guys that cadaver quote. He's a really awesome author of this commentary in Isaiah, but the way he depicts this, it's a terrible thing when brother fights brother, right? When people are infighting. So civil wars have been fought, you guys, throughout Egypt, through basically from this time until almost now. The most recent civil war, anyone got a stab at that? That happened in Egypt? 2011 to 2014. That's within the last decade they fought a civil war. They have struggled to keep peace within their people, still fulfilling this prophecy today. That hit me pretty hard as I was going through this passage, to understand that these prophecies, a lot of them are not one-shot things, but they're things that have repeatedly happened within these nations since these prophecies were made. So confounded counsel is our second one. In the ancient world, Egypt was known as one of the, as I've told you guys, as one of the powerhouses, right? They're one of the most advanced technologies as far as war goes. And it's because, you guys, their science and technological achievements far surpassed many of the other people around them. They had medicines and things that other nations and countries didn't have. They had, did you know that they built, you know what an obelisk is, right? It's these giant, like, pyramid-looking things, but they were skinny and tall. They built those so they could tell time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they could tell what time it was based on how long the shadow was. The early Egyptians created chariots, and they modified chariots for war. They were when you see a lot in the Old Testament, as you read through, people start to fear chariots, and they fear Egypt because of their chariots. They were one of the first people to have bronze weapons. So instead of stone, they were using metal. They were pretty gnarly. You didn't want to have to go up against them. But check this out. Did you not only know that war side of it, but the science part of it? This is what I love. I like to nerd out just a little bit. When Alexander the Great in 332 BC, almost 400 years later after this prophecy, came to conquer Egypt, he was captivated by their wonders and history. And he established the city of Alexandria in Egypt. Alexandria became the center of knowledge for years, as it had one of the largest libraries ever to exist. It is said that there were 550,000 volumes, whether they were scrolls, books, or tomes. And if you were to read one a day, every day, you would be in the library for 1,500 years. It saddens me to know that as such a great and vast amount of information and knowledge was gathered into one place, a fire took it all. not to nerd out with you guys, but one of the inventions that the ancient Egyptians and Greeks had was a steam engine. Yeah, they had invented a steam engine. Do you know how long it took from that moment of them losing that technology before the steam engine became relevant again? So this is 332 BC. The city of Alexandria is built, and in 1698, someone brought back the idea of a steam engine for the first time, and it wasn't really turned into like the piston steam engine that we have now until 1712. 1700 years later, we had to reinvent stuff that they already had. Yeah, a little crazy, right? Anyway, the point of what I'm making is this: Egypt was very far advanced in what they had available to them, and yet at this moment, God's saying, hey, from this point forward, that's going to falter and fail. And every time that there's any kind of growth or anything, anytime that there's power struggles within nations, they always stop looking at the political side of things once it's gotten to that point, and they start looking at the wise men, right? They look at the scientists, they look at the people who have these brilliant or bright or big ideas, and they always look for that one shot, right? That great weapon that's going to help end the war. And we see this over and over again. Look at World War I. Unfortunately brought us mustard gas. World War II brought us the atomic bomb. And the Korean War brought us napalm. Not great inventions, but they're inventions that were people turned to ask for help to end conflict quicker. Right? Not great things, but that's what happens. When you look for collective strength and you're sitting before war and you're trying to figure out this, you go to the wisest people you have and you ask them to create something. And God says no more. From this point forward, Egypt has gone through a decline in any kind of technological advances they would ever make. And it still holds true today, unfortunately. So the next thing is this: a hard and fierce ruler. I started talking about this guy at the beginning, but I kind of cut it out because I got messed up in my notes. But there's a guy, Pianki, right, was that Ethiopian pharaoh who came in and took over Egypt. He did not do it in a nice way. He came in and took major cities and basically divided the people and took the majority of it and said, those of you who are smaller cities and states, if you don't sign basically being subjugated to these larger states that I've already taken care of, then you're cut out of everything. We're not going to send you any aid. We're not going to help you out. If anything, we're going to make life harder on you. So he basically forced the smaller tribes of Egypt to sign a treaty. So we have him, right? But that might not even be it. Right? We have Sargon II, Sennacherib, Esarhaddon, these names are weird, Ashurbanipal, Artaxerxes III, King Gog of the north, the Romans, and even the Assyrians shortly after in 673 BC would all come and conquer Egypt and establish rule and reign over them. And I didn't even talk about the Greeks, but I mean, I mentioned that earlier. Alexander the Great came through and conquered them and set up Greek settlements there. Egypt has not been necessarily successful at having their own leadership run their own country since then. And now they're doing their own thing. I think they have a presidency now, and they are running their own country. But over and over again, you guys, throughout history, they were oppressed by one king after another. How about economic turmoil? So did you know that prosperity in Egypt, 90% of it relies around what, do you guys think? The Nile River, right? So what happens in this prophecy about the Nile River, right? We talked about drying up, all this stuff happening. The annual flooding of the Nile River causes the farmland to be covered with a layer of silt, which provides the necessary moisture and fertilization for them to grow crops. If even just 1 year is missed from the flood season, the results were scarcity and famine and loss of life. 1 year. They're north of Egypt, on the other side of the Nile, yeah. I'd have to look at another map, man. It's been like 3 days since I looked at a map. I don't remember, sorry. But I wanted you guys to get this, though. The drying up of the river would also bring about decline in available fishing, right, for the fishing industry. It would leave nothing but ponds and marshes behind. The water that was left behind would become stagnant, and it would start to smell bad. It would start to stink. It would bring disease. It would become unfit for drinking, and would result in drought. So even though there was water still there, it was unusable. There's this little tiny snail, right? This is fun. There's this little tiny snail. My mom loves snails. She actually hates them. So, sorry. But there's this little tiny snail that sort of feeds on the roots of papyrus and other reeds that grow in the Nile River. And every year when the floodwaters come, it actually takes all these snails and throws them out. And it pushes them into the Mediterranean Sea. And fish eat them, and they're happy, and then the reeds live. And it's all good. So it used to carry them away every year, but if the flood season didn't happen, right, the snails would be there to eat on the papyrus and stuff like that, and it would impact the economy because it would destroy papyrus. And papyrus is a reed that they would tear down or cut down, and they would strip it from the fibers, and they would weave it in to make paper, right? So if you have no papyrus, you've now closed down an entire industry of paper. Because of the lack of water, you also couldn't grow cotton. And then now you're shutting down your economic growth of fabrics, clothing, necessities like that. Without the water, you also, did you guys know this? This is a fun fact. Did you know that one of ancient Egypt's biggest exports, or one of their biggest things that they were really famous for, they even paid their employees in it a lot, was beer? Do you know what you can't make with without fresh water? Beer. You're unable to brew beer. So now they've lost a way to pay some of their workers, and they've also lost one of their biggest economic exports. The continued economic hardships would affect everyone from the rich to the poor, all the way down to the paid slave. And whether this has happened once or not, or more than this one time close to when this was prophesied or not, I don't know. But I do know, this is another hard one. It was a pretty intense hit. Did you know that in 1970, 52 years ago, they built a dam to dam up part of the Nile River. And part of this dam was to add more farmland. The idea was to create a control of water flow into irrigation channels, and hopefully to open up thousands of new agricultural acres by the irrigation projects. But they've discovered that through the saltwater intrusion, so by the way, when they slowed down the river flowing into the Mediterranean, do you know what happens? Anyone got a guess what happens when the water for so long is pushed this way, so long it all of a sudden slows down? It backflows. So now the Mediterranean is backflowing salt water into farmland. But they've discovered that through the saltwater intrusion, they have lost over twice the agricultural acreage as they were gaining. The slower river meant that the Mediterranean was backed up into farmland, effectively salting the land. Anyone know what happens when you throw salt into a garden? It kills it. That was what would happen if you really hated someone back then and you went and conquered their land. You would salt their earth. You would salt the ground because you would make it so that crops couldn't grow. They have effectively salted their own land twice as much as what they were gaining by building this dam. And this is not just me saying this to you. I wanted to show you that this is all verifiable. It's in a report made to the United States Congress, and it's become part of the congressional record. It's case number or number S3448. In an economic report, the first thing that they, and I want to read this to you guys, even though it's kind of a little long and a little weird, but I want you to understand, like, this is happening in Egypt, and we're recording it here. But it says the first thing in this, and this is a direct quote, the first thing that drew attention was the smog levels in Los Angeles as an economic or ecological disaster. The second thing was the DDT problem that has since been resolved by laws, and then the third thing was Egypt. And here's what it was said: the Aswan Dam, Aswan Dam has slowed down the Nile 600 miles downriver. The sandbars have stopped building up on the delta. The Mediterranean is flooding the delta, and 1 million fertile acres have disappeared under salt water. Below the dam, snails carry the blood flukes, or anyway, this weird thing, and thousands of men and women and children are going to die of this painful and cruel disease from these snails. The Nile no longer carries its nutrient-rich sediment out to sea, and the fish are disappearing, and the fishing families are moving to the slums of Cairo and Alexandria. That source of food is disappearing, also oxygen from the loss of greenery and water. This is 1970. This is within some of your lifetimes. This has devastated the fishing industry, you guys, in Egypt still today. In 2019, Egypt has somewhat recovered their fishing industry, but never to the same effect. Not because, well, mainly because fish haven't returned back to the Nile. The conditions aren't right for them. But the only reason why, right now, in 2013, Egypt became the third, and moving forward, it's the same every year since. But in 2019, they were able to recover, right? Recover. They're now the number 3 export in the world for fish. And you're thinking, great, but it's not from the Nile. They have built private land, basically, that they've built ponds on to raise and grow fish so they can continue to export them. The problem with this, though, is that those private lands are only fishable by people who own it or work for the people who own it. In an article, like I said, from 2019, I read this week, it said a fisherman might make 60 to 70 Egyptian pounds a day from fishing the Nile with a crew of 3 people. That's roughly $4.10 United States currency. And that has to be split between 3 people for a day's worth of work. Yeah. That's the state of the fishing industry in Egypt today because of this dam that was built. This is a direct relay of this prophecy. And it ties into the next point because this dam was built by their government in hopes to add farmland to it, right? But the last thing on our list, right, was political downfall. When I say political downfall, I don't mean just the aspect of them dealing with other countries or different things like that, but within themselves, right? They're unable to govern themselves properly. And that might be a harsh way to say it, but the political leaders of Egypt decided to build a dam to add farmland and lost twice as much as they gained. They've lost their ability to fish the Nile River and have let in this snail that has brought in disease that will kill, or that has killed thousands of people. It's kind of harsh, right? And these things sound hard. They sound like, why would God do something like this, right? I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever had to deal with that feeling of like, why would God do these things? And sometimes, you guys, the understanding of those things are beyond what we can understand. They're beyond what we can grasp. But the thing is, you guys, that healing is coming to Egypt. The hard thing is, not to jump ahead, let me kick back just a minute. So within their political, you know how I told you they would have political downfall, they made all these alliances, right? Judah said no, but they made all these alliances. And as Assyria finally got to the point where they were mad enough to respond, they came back, and every city they took that had signed treaty with Egypt, guess who didn't show up for the fight? Egypt. And city and nation by nation, as they fell and it finally got to Egypt, guess who Egypt didn't have to bolster their forces? Any friends? Yeah. Sorry. But yeah, they basically burned all their bridges politically with other nations. And when Assyria finally came in 673 BC, it took them 10 years to conquer all of Egypt. Isaiah 19:14 through 15 says, "The Lord has mingled within her a spirit of confusion, and they will make Egypt stagger in all its deeds as a drunken man staggers in his vomit. And there will be nothing for Egypt that head or tail, branch or reed may do." Basically, nothing can be done, great or small, to reverse this. It's harsh. I've seen my fair share of staggering drunks in my life. They aren't gracious, and they are definitely lacking in any elegance or any semblance of being completely put together. All 5 of these judgments, though, God says he will add to their confusion and make them like a staggering drunk, unable to figure out what's wrong and why it's wrong. Now we move on from these harsh judgments, right? Now we get into the nice part. Now we get into the healing. Now we get to see, let's just read. Isaiah 19 verses 16 through 19 says this: "In the day the Egyptians will be like women and tremble with fear before the hand that the Lord of hosts shakes over them. And the land of Judah will become a terror to the Egyptians. Everyone to whom it is mentioned will fear because the purpose that the Lord of hosts has provided against it." Doesn't sound like healing, but it gets there. Verses 18, "In that day there will be 5 cities in the land of Egypt that speak the language of Canaan and swear allegiance to the Lord of hosts. One of these will be called the city of destruction." That city of destruction also has another name. It's translated most of the times as the city of the sun, which is Heliopolis. "In that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord and its at its borders." I had mentioned, again, I cut out that section, and I feel bad I cut out this section, but Heliopolis was one of the cities that our buddy Pianki took over in Egypt. It was a major city he conquered. And so now we're being told in the future, this city will turn around basically and come back to God. It'll be a city that they worship the Lord in. And not only will they worship, but they will build an altar and a temple, and they'll make sacrifices to the Lord. Not to get into it really deep. Actually, I'll keep reading and we'll get into it in a minute. "Egypt will also no longer be feared, but instead begin to fear Jerusalem and Israel, and it will be due to the descendant." Wow, I can't read that word. "It will be because of Jesus' descent back to earth that they will all witness." Verses 20 through 22. "It will be a sign and a witness to the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt when they cry out to the Lord because of oppressors. He will send them a savior and a defender and a deliverer. Amen. And the Lord will make himself known to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians will know the Lord in that day and worship with sacrifice and offering. And they will make vows to the Lord and perform them. And the Lord will strike Egypt, striking and healing, and they will return to the Lord, and he will listen to their pleas for mercy, and he will heal them." Yeah, how awesome is that though? Like I just went through some pretty harsh judgments that are coming, right? That have recently happened to Israel or to Egypt, and we see that in the future, in the coming days, that these things are going to stop, that they're going to be provided healing, which is awesome. It's something to look forward to. But one of the weird things in there, I don't know if you guys caught this. This caught my attention this week, and it's been stuck with me. I had to do a lot of reading to understand this. Did you guys catch in 19 and 20, it says that they're going to build an altar, and they will be joyously serving the Lord and when he comes back, right? So this is talking about the second coming of Christ and stuff like that. And I want to keep on track with where we're at. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit just to touch it. But I wanted you guys to, here's the weird part. This is what got stuck in my head on it. Did you guys notice that they're going to be making animal sacrifices on these altars? And well, it doesn't say what part of the millennium kingdom this is going to be in. So we don't know if it's going to be at the beginning or at the end or in the middle. But what I wanted to point out, though, is that they're going to be making animal sacrifices. And I had a problem with that. Like, personally had a excuse me, what? Kind of moment this week as I read that. And I had to go back and look at a lot of it and try to understand it. So we see in the millennial reign, or in the second coming of Jesus, Ezekiel 43 covers this aspect of animal sacrifice, and it's no longer done the same way it was. It's no longer done as an atonement or a covering of sin, but it is now done in a remembrance of the sacrifice that Jesus was for us. And so as we will, like not we necessarily, but as animal sacrifices are made in the millennial kingdom, it'll be done just like how we take communion in remembrance of what's been done. But I thought that was interesting. I don't know about you guys, but I was kind of taken back by it. And you probably didn't notice it in just that quick reading over it, but I was pretty sure we were done with that, you know? And it's good to know that we are done with that until the millennial rule and reign. And again, that will be for the people who are still left. So yes, I guess, Mark, the answer would be that it's for the remnant. But it won't be for an atonement of sin. It'll be a remembrance that Christ was our ultimate sacrifice. And I just thought that was cool, and I really wanted to share that with you. All right, so moving on. Isaiah 19:23 says, in that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and Assyria will come into Egypt, and Egypt to Assyria, and the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. In that day Israel will be the third with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth. 25, whom the Lord of hosts has blessed, saying, blessed be Egypt my people, the Assyrians the work of my hands, and Israel my inheritance. That's just more proof to me that this is talking about the millennial kingdom, because there's no current highway that connects these places. If you want to know where Assyria is in modern day, it's modern day Iraq. So we're talking like basically a highway or a connecting point between Egypt, Israel, and Assyria, and all three of these guys coming together basically to worship God. And that hasn't happened yet. So we know that that is to come, and that's going to be in the future. So that's how we know. I know kind of earlier I was like, hey, this is the millennial kingdom. I didn't really set it up for you guys. This is how we know that that's happening, because it's talking about the unity of the world. It's just a cool thought, though. One of the things I thought about, though, is that when they come together for this worship, right, this unity that transcends nations, it transcends races, it transcends political parties, it transcends anything that can be a dividing block, right? Because in the end, when we're with Jesus, nothing's going to matter except for that we're with him, right? And I think that's a really cool point. And I wanted to challenge you guys, because that's something that doesn't have to wait. That's not something that we have to wait for the millennial kingdom. We have the ability today to start looking at the things that cause division, and we have the ability to put those things behind us. And I think that's going to take two things, time and obedience. But I think we kind of covered that earlier when we talked about Ecclesiastes 3:11, right? All things will be made beautiful in his timing. And we will learn to worship God together as one, without division, without frustrations, without nitpicking at one another for little things in our faith. I think it's going to be amazing. I look forward to the time that we can come together as one united world and worship God. That's going to be cool. I can't imagine what it'd be like to, can you imagine? I just want you guys to, this is not in my notes, but can you imagine, just think of like the two absolute weirdest languages you've ever heard, and you don't understand a single word of it. And imagine one person from each of those languages on your right and your left, and then you're singing praises to God in different languages. And you have no idea what they're saying. And yet all of it is done in unity and worship of the Lord. I get excited about that. I think it's cool. I have no clue what's going on or what's being said, but I'll know that it's edifying and glorifying to God. And I'm in for that. All right, let's close this out. I promise you we're almost done. Isaiah 20, the first two verses say this. In the year that the commander-in-chief who was sent from Sargon, the king of Assyria, came to Ashdod and fought against it and captured it. And at that time the Lord spoke by Isaiah the son of Amoz, saying, go and loose the sackcloth from your waist, and take off your sandals from your feet. And he did so, and he walked naked and barefoot. So the word epitome is one of my all-time favorite words. The word epitome itself, not only does it sound cool, but it has a really cool definition. An epitome means the perfect example of, right? So I want you to think of it as this. When I love this word, it's such a fun thing to say. This is the epitome of, and then fill in the blank, right? And that's basically saying, like, this is the perfect example of. I used to say this a lot when I was in Bible college. I lived with my aunt and uncle and my little cousin Sarah, and I asked her for permission to share the story, so I'm going to share this unashamedly. So Sarah was super cool because when she was like old enough to crawl, but not old enough to walk, and she couldn't talk yet, she was what I used to say the epitome of chill, because she wouldn't cry over pretty much anything. And not only did she not cry over anything, she was like, you could be like, all right, Sarah, it's time for bed. And she would literally go wherever her blanket was, pick it up, stick her thumb in her mouth, and just lift her arms up like this, waiting for you to come pick her up. And you would pick her up, and you would take her to bed, and you would lay her in bed, and she'd just look up at you, and you'd turn on the little glowworm thing, turn off the light, walk out the door, and she'd go to sleep. Right? Like, I was like, dude, be praying for that for my son. But I can't think of a better word. I literally was trying to think of like something that would be like the epitome that you would all understand and get. Like, the epitome of summer is fill in the blank. And then I was like, you know how hard it is to fill in that blank? The perfect example of something. And it's different for everyone, right? The reason I'm going on this tangent, though, you guys, is because Egypt and Ethiopia are the epitome, the perfect example of not following God. And we see that in this passage. Isaiah is called to walk around naked and barefoot. I don't know about you guys. I would like to think that if God called me to do something, I would do it without question. But if God told me to walk around naked for 3 years, there'd be a lot of questions. I don't think that would be an easy, yes, Lord, send me, I'll go moment. But let's look at this, verses 3-6, and this is the last of the scripture we're going to cover today. Then the Lord said, as my servant Isaiah has walked naked and barefoot for 3 years, by the way, 3 years, as a sign and a portent. Thank you. I lost my place in my wording. And a portent against Egypt and Cush. So shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptian captives and the Cushite exiles, both the young and the old, naked and barefoot, with buttocks exposed, the nakedness of Egypt. Then they shall be dismayed and ashamed because of Cush, their hope, and of Egypt, their boast. And the inhabitants of this coastland will say in that day, behold, this is what has happened to those in whom we hoped, and whom we have fled for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria. How shall we escape? The cool thing is the people of God will not be saying that last line, right? Because they turned down this political treaty to be dragged into. They will not be wondering where their salvation came from. The Assyrian army will not come for them. They know that that they rest in the protection and the guidance of the Lord, and not worldly treaties and fallible man. Can I just say I'm really glad that I'm not Isaiah in this time period? The Hebrew word, right? So the Hebrew word for naked, and this is I can't even say it, arum. It's like arrow with an M at the end of it. You give that a shot. That word means nude, either partially or totally. And I've heard a lot of people try to say, oh, well, he was wearing like his undergarment. No, that passage says buttocks exposed. At best, they were wearing thong diapers. And yeah, it's gross. It's a gross picture. Aaron offered to come and model this for us, and I turned him down. And then I thought, actually, that'd be kind of cool. So I called him back, and he turned me down. But could you imagine, just in your mind for a minute, think about Aaron naked in a, oh, never mind, don't imagine that. Don't think about that. Right. That would have made a pretty memorable example, though, right? But you guys, I want you to understand this, that this is all happening because Ethiopia and Egypt did not heed God's word to stop, and they continued to try to make alliances. They continued to stir up trouble. They provoked a fight with Assyria, and then when Assyria responded, that's what we saw in verse 1 of chapter 20, right? And it hit that first city. Egypt didn't show up because they were afraid. And then they watched all their allies get picked off one by one. So my conclusion for you guys is this. I want to read you guys this quote, and it's going to almost sound, you're going to think like, wow, that doesn't make quite sense, but it'll make sense, I promise. So I'm going to read you this quote from a guy named Jack London, and then I'm going to give you some application. This quote is really cool. It says this: I would rather that my spark should burn out in a brilliant blaze than it should be stifled by dry rot. I would rather be a superb meteor, every atom of me in a magnificent glow, than a sleepy, impermanent planet. The function of man is to live, not to exist. I shall not waste my days trying to prolong them. I shall use my time. That quote to me was extremely fitting, because we're not called to seek out collective strength and lean on other nations or even our own nation for support. We're called to lean out and lean on God for our support. We're called to lean out and lean on God, but it takes us being bold and courageous to stand on the strength that God gives us, right? To burn brightly in the face of the world, to be that exact response, to say, God, not my time, but yours. To be willing to look at the hard thing of picking sides amongst basically this great conflict. And instead of saying, I'm going to pick the side that sounds good, I'm going to pick the side that feels good, I'm going to stand in the face of adversity and trust you. This doesn't have to be on a big scale like a world war or anything like that, but this can be on very simple and small things that are personal in each one of our lives. We're all called to have to make decisions every day, in every little moment, or every little or big great thing we do. And so I just want to call you guys, and I want to give this challenge to you guys. Instead of responding in what seems like the right thing, or what seems like the right thing for us, to take time to ask, what's the God thing? What is God wanting for us to do? How is God wanting us to react? When is God wanting us to react to this? Because I promise you guys, just like it said in Isaiah 19, when God is lounging about from the window, watching it all transpire, not scared or worried, because his timing is perfect, he will act when he needs to act. And his outcome will be greater or more than anything we could ever imagine or plan or purpose for ourselves. Isaiah was definitely willing to stand out and be bold for the Lord. He chose to live life in the face of adversity. And so I challenge you guys today, live a life submitted to God and his will, rather than the comfort of our own waiting and the comfort of our own strength, waiting on him, or waiting on a comfortable outcome or a comfortable lifestyle. Be willing to say yes to the challenging things God calls us to. So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the fact that we get to make choices that honor you and glorify you. And God, as we make those choices, I pray that you would just lead us, that you would guide us, that you would strengthen our hand for the hard things that come about. And God, that you would lead us from one situation to the next. And that our faith and our trust would be in you. Because our timing is not your timing. And your timing is perfect. In your name we pray. Amen.